Good evening, everybody. I'm Neelima Bhatt, the co-author of the book Shakti Leadership. And welcome to today's Shakti Dialogue. Today is the 30th of September, 2020. And we have two amazing guests who are going to speak to us on Egypt. And the title of today's Shakti Dialogue is called, What is it about Egypt? We have Dr. Laurie Larsen, who is a mythologist from Pacifica in California. And she did her PhD specializing in Egypt. She has a deep understanding of Egypt. And I met Laurie when we were leading the Nile Shakti tour in February 2019. And Rukmini is here, and some others from that tour are probably joining us as well. We were utterly delighted with how Laurie just brought Egypt alive for us. She seemed to have such a deep connection to the pantheon, the mythology. She lived it. So I've always wanted to do this dialogue on Egypt with her. So I'm so happy the day has finally come. We also have Dr. Neela Bhattacharya, who is a scholar and an author. She has written the book, The Absent Mother God of the West. And Neela in addition to being a scholar, she's also something of a mystic and a yogini, a tantrika. So she went to Egypt this year, 2020, and wrote a blog. So when I read that blog on Egypt, and I realized here is Neela, who was experiencing Egypt through her esoteric lens. And that would be so interesting to hear her understand and explain her experience of Egypt through perhaps a yogic lens, or through her understanding of the goddesses of yoga, and how do you compare those archetypal forces between these two traditions. So I just know it's going to be an amazing session. We have a total of 90 minutes. I thought we will have them each speak for about 20 minutes. But after that, we can have a really rich, nice discussion. So with that, I invite Laurie to come and take the floor.
Thank you. All right. I am going to begin to share my screen. All right. Well, I want to start by welcoming all and saying how very honored I am to be been invited by Neelima and to be joining Neela. She has been inspirational in me discovering a new term and a new way to talk about the feminine goddess. And that is, I love in her book, she calls the feminine god to help us unstick the programming we have around goddess and God, and really she questions, she helps us understand how we see the God image, and it's so beautiful to see that. So I'm going to take us through, I loved your title, Neelima, What is it about Egypt? This is so evocative, and she's invited us to delve into the mystical treasure trove and the archetypal symbols, and with an eye to understanding what it is this ancient culture brings to our contemporary times. And that was really where I started in my own dissertation work, was questioning how do we get to the renewal and the resurrection and the understanding of what's missing in our own culture, that Egypt, within over 3,000 years of history, was able to continually renew itself and recreate itself after utter collapse and society because of inappropriate leadership and resource depletion and climate change and all the things we're facing today. So let's get started. Why is this not going? Uh-oh. Let me try this again. I apologize.
Sometimes it just takes a while to
Well, I'm
find.
not even seeing it. Let me stop sharing and see if I can go back. No. There we go. Well. There we are. All right, this is an image of the Nile, and you can see what a contrast there is between the green, fertile, and the very, very desert, barren desert. And so the ancient Egyptians' enduring influence calls our attention to what remains alive in both our individual and collective psyche. For when we see their images and hear their words and experience the aliveness in their temples and tombs of the spiritual energy that still resonates there, very alive, it calls to us and it awakens in us a desire to understand, to delve into the mysteries. And the very consciousness of Egypt's ancient people was deeply influenced by the land and by the mighty river, earth and water. May we bless these elements with our own thanksgiving and attention. To understand their imagery and unique contributions, I found I needed to try to see through their perspective. I didn't want to just report on the historical evidence. And so this map is a great place to begin, because this is, I was using this, I was trying to locate the different locations as I went through my research, and I'd read about something. And this is oriented the way that we naturally think about north in the south, or north in the top, south in the bottom, and so forth. But it's not how Egypt saw it. To understand their imagery, we have to see it the way they saw it. And this is with the south at the top, the north at the bottom in the Delta region. And this correlates to the sun's journey as well, for when we face the south, the sun rises on the left, it inscribes an arc, a circle, and that circle is only half a circle. And the other half of the circle, as the journey continues, is into the netherworld, into the underworld. And interestingly enough, it is this very place that the rebirth and renewal take place. So here is an image of Dendara, one of the temples we visited. It's the temple of Hathor, and actually in Egypt, the Egyptians call their temples houses of life. And this is, this is sacred geometry, and you can see the remnants in front of the temple itself of the giant gate, and the people give the perfect contrast of how huge this gate was. And then there would have been enormous pylons that came off of that, and the pylons were seen as the two goddesses, Isis and Nephthys, and we'll talk more about them as we go forward. Here's an image from the temple or the house of life of Seti I. And Seti built his temple to restore the old traditions after an enormous upheaval and trauma happened with a king, about 4 kings before him, who had come in and tried to erase the polytheism, create just a God that is in his making, and that he's the only priest. And it completely gave Egypt for 17 years in upheaval. I felt like it was very pertinent to our times, especially here in the US. Here is Seti I demonstrating something that you see 1,000 times over in the temples and the tombs. He is making an offering. And this would have occurred daily, at least 3 times in every temple throughout the land. The altar tables are piled high with all the beautiful abundance of the earth. And he's lighting an incense arm to honor the god Amun's bark, his boat that carried his sacred and held his sacred image, and he's the ram-headed god. And it's Seti's reciprocity, his reciprocal actions that really were seen as fundamental to the connection that they had to their divine and to their ancestors. So here we see Seti making a presentation of the goddess Maat. She's tiny, held in his hand. She's seated on a basket, and he's making the gesture of praise as he opens the shrine doors and offers her to the gods in the temple. And this is a presentation of Maat, was done every single day. It was the first offering of the day. As the sun was rising, the doors of the shrine would be opened, and the king or his representative, the high priest, would make the offering, the presenting of Maat. So who is this Maat? Well, here she is, beautifully depicted on the left side of the image. Behind her is almost identical a goddess named Rimpet. But Maat is the personification of the cosmic pattern. She is the aspect of time that recreates first time creation every day with sunrise. Creation was not a one-time event in the far distant past. It occurs every day at dawn and gives us all the chance to renew and to recreate the perfection that Maat set in place in first time. Rinpet is wearing a notched palm frond, and we can tell the goddesses and gods because of the headdresses they wear and the crowns. Maat is a plume, an ostrich plume, and Rinpet is wearing the notched palm frond, which both are actually hieroglyphic symbols as well. The ostrich plume is the feather of truth. It means truth. And the notched palm means year. So Rinpet is the other aspect of time, which is the cyclic return, the eternal return of the day into night, and so forth. So Maat, Osiris, Re, they're all archetypal forces that engage in a continuous process of creation and regeneration in ancient Egypt. Here we have one of my most favorite images of all time. This is winged Maat from the Queen of Nefertari's tomb. One of the most sacred places I've ever been. It's absolutely gorgeous. Queen Nefertari was the great wife and beloved of Ramesses II, the great Ramesses, who was the son of Seti I. And we're all in the New Kingdom. We're in the 19th dynasty. And Nefertari was a force in her own right. She was a scribe, which was very unusual, very difficult to become. And she was a scribe. She could write and read the hieroglyphs. She was, as the god Thoth is the god of wisdom, he is the scribe god as well, and she was one of his devotees. She is also winged here, which shows her protection, her power to use her wings to enliven and re-enliven life itself. Her ostrich feather is black here, and the male ostrich I found is black, has black plumage. The female has the white. And it's a bit mysterious why she would be wearing the black plumage, but it is so throughout her tomb. She has multiple representations throughout the tomb. And she, in the moment she occurs, in their cosmology in the moment, the first moment of creation. And Nun is the great watery abyss, the inert body of water. And Atum is the androgynous god who arises more like a dawning of the consciousness of an infant almost. And at one point, Atum complains to Nun and says, oh, I'm so weary of my inertia. I need a place to stand. And Nun said, take your daughter Mot, order, and place her to your nose, which is the symbol for joy. And in doing that, the primordial mound rises, creation bursts forth, Atum exhales, clothing Mot's brother Shu, who also wears the plume, in the body, the garments of life. He's the atmosphere shot through with golden light, and that is the first breath breathed. So here we have Tefnut, who is the alter aspect of Mot. And this was so interesting to discover this, because in Egypt, they have something I call complementary, that's called complementary duality. Our style of consciousness is oppositional duality, as Neela so beautifully points out in her book. And our complementary duality in ancient Egypt was really one of the ways that they got the flow of life going. So as opposed to having one category of positive characteristics and trying to eliminate the opposite in the other category of so-called negative characteristics, they blended them. And they saw that when you go out of balance or harmony, when the fiery aspect gets too hot, too fierce, too destructive, then we move into the gentle order that Mot brings and back. That would be too sleepy, too passive. And so we go back and forth. And Tefnut, her alter ego, the lioness-headed goddess, came down in history and became Sekhmet. And it was incredibly important, especially during the New Kingdom. There was one pathway where a god set up over 600 black granite Sekhmet life-size statues. And we had the rare opportunity to visit a small chapel off of the main Luxor complex in Karnak in Luxor, and see a Sekhmet who had stood in her chamber of her temple for thousands of years. And it was really quite moving. So another image from Nefertari's tomb. This is Isis and Nephthys with the god who is a combination here of Amun, Ra, and Osiris. And this is an image of resurrection, rebirth. The face of Amun Ra, the ram's head and horn, are green, which indicates that not only is this the solar god, but this is the underworld god, and that is Osiris. And Osiris is the god who brings us fertility. Though he is dead, he's in the underworld, he's been dismembered and rejoined by Isis and Nephthys. He is the fertility, he's the renewal, he's the constant renewal of the river itself during inundation. Isis and Nephthys are pictured here so beautifully as they are over and over and over, and we have missed that in our mythological rendition of the story of Osiris and Isis, because a Greek came in and tried to make it literature. And in Egypt, the myths are little snippets. They're in the sacred texts, they're blended in. They were mainly enacted in rituals of days long that happened throughout the land over and over and over. The calendar was so dense with celebrations, it's hard to think how they got stuff done. But anyway, so they, Isis and Nephthys are seen as mere images of one another. Isis is the day, the outer, the womb of and the lap of God. Her hieroglyph is on the right here, it's the throne. She is the lap, the seat of the god, the divine, the king. Whereas Nephthys is often just dismissed as like, we don't really know. She's the housewife, maybe housekeeper. But what her symbol tells us that she wears on her head, it's the basket. Remember Mott sitting in the basket? It's the basket, which means lady or mistress, as in opposite lord or master. And then the symbol below it, the rectangle with the small red rectangle in the corner, means sacred enclosure. So she is the goddess of the mysteries of the night. She's the one who is the inner womb, the tomb, the night part of the journey. Here's an image that means almost exactly the same thing. Again, Isis on the left, Nephthys on the right. We can read that because of their headdresses. And in the center now is a little bit different image. We have Osiris as this digit pillar, which means stability. It's the hieroglyphic symbol for stability, for the foundational stability. And then we have the Ankh, the black Ankh, which means the key of life, the breath of life. And coming out of the Ankh are the beautiful feminine arms of the goddess Nut, the sky, who's also a mother goddess. And in her cosmology, she swallows the sun at the end of the day. It travels through the interior of her body, and she gives birth to the sun at dawn. And so we see here the dawning sun, the new sun, the renewed life of the land. Is she's lifting it up, bringing it up. And here are some of my favorite beings. These are the baboon, which is related to Thoth, the god of wisdom, and the scribe god. And here the baboons are standing and their hands are up in a gesture of praise. And they are praising the dawn. And baboons in their natural habitats are actually seen to do this. And they'll holler and hoot and make a big joyous commotion as the sun comes above the horizon. So here we have another image of resurrection. And this is from the book of the Gates, Book of Gates. It's the 12th gate. And it's the final hour of the night, the 12th hour. Each day and each night are divided into 12 segments, just like we do. And this is the image of Nun, down here, the cosmic waters, the beginning primordial waters, upholding the bark, the holy vessel, which is also feminine. It was seen as Isis or Nephthys. And here he's holding up the Nephthys, the night bark. And in the bark are the companions. So in our culture, the hero's journey, the hero's myth, is a soul hero taking a journey, a solo journey into the wilds, risking life and limb to gain the treasure, the gold, and then to bring it back to his community. Here, the heroes are the companions. Everyone in that bark, from the god who willingly submits to his death and potential resurrection, to the companions he chooses to go with him on this journey, who volunteer. They all willingly make the descent into the darkness. And this is such a model for me for our times, because I think that's what is being called to us to enact, is this willingness to make the descent into the darkness of either our own beings or our culture or the political landscape, whatever calls to us. There's any number of ways we can do this, but to find the community, to find the others that we resonate with who are willing to take this journey and join with them. It isn't the solo god making his way or the solo hero making his way. It's all of us joining together for the resurrection. So let me just quickly go through and tell you who's in this bark. The three people, the three guardians here, the three gods, are just named as guardians. And their duty is to be attentive, to watch the waters, because what is waiting for them is Apophis, the great serpent of the depths. And Apophis' longing is to halt the process of renewal, strand the bark, and take everything back into the undifferentiated oneness, to just. So their job is to watch the waters, and when Apophis starts to rise, to spear him, to push him away, to dismember him. He'll be back tomorrow, but tonight we've got to take care of him. In the center we have here, again, Isis and Nephthys, and the scarab beetle, Khepri, whose name translates it as a hieroglyphic symbol, constantly becoming. And he is pushing the solar orb upwards into the waiting arms of Nut. And Nut here is standing on the head of Osiris, who's doing a wonderful backwards curl and enclosing the netherworld, the ancestral realm. So Nut is acting as a bridge between the realm of this boat and the netherworld, and bridging the divine, the ancestral, and the human. And so, and then in the back of the boat, we have Geb, who is the earth. We have Shu, who's the first sexually differentiated. He's the atmosphere. He lifts up his daughter off of the sun and holds her up. Nut, of course, is the mother of Osiris, Seth, Isis, and Nephthys. And then we have three other deities in the back of the boat who are often shown together with Mot. And Mot's companions are often Heka, Hu, and Sia. Hu and Sia are Mot's saying and doing, for they talked about Mot consciousness being something that we can all learn from the wisdom texts from the 5th dynasty onward. They had this form, the genre of literature called wisdom literature, wisdom texts by modern scholars, and they would teach themselves. They didn't believe so much in sin as they did in stupidity. And they said, if you don't know how to behave correctly so that you are upholding the Matian principles, then you must need more education. And they wrote this literature, and it was a popular form of literature. It's very similar to our own times when you read it, some of the reflections that they have. So we better move on here. So here's this beautiful image from the book of Ani. And the book of the dead is a misnomer. It's actually, by the Egyptian name, it's called the book of going forth into day. Their hope was not to remain dead or disappeared. They were hoping to return to life, to resurrect. And they only could do that through their own actions in this life. And this is where that was determined. Will you be fed to Ammit, the crocodile, lioness-bodied, hippo-butted, terrible devouress, who's actually very incredible? She's the guardian of the eternal gate. Or will you be found true of voice, meaning vindicated and ready to enter eternal life, invited to enter eternal life? And that was determined by the weighing of the heart. Your heart was placed, in this case, on the left panel, and Mot's feather or a small figure of Mot placed on the right pan of the scale. And if the scale balanced, it meant your heart was as light as a feather, because you had found the joy and the way to enact Mot's wisdom, for she is a wisdom goddess. I believe she really was probably the model for Sophia and the Shekinah and so forth in the other mystery traditions. And accompanying Ani is his wife, Tutu. They're both beautifully made up. They're gorgeous clothing. She's a chantress, a priestess of Amun. And above them sit the 44 gods that would hear the confessions, they're called negative confessions, because the deceased would declare, I did not. And then the 44 declarations that proved that he knew what the social cohesion relied upon and that he had not offended those traditions. And here we have just one more vision of it. This is Hunnefer, is the man on the left here being led forward by the god Anubis. Thoth is standing to the right of the scale, ready to record. And this I want to just briefly, and then he's clearly been accepted. He's been found through a voice because he's being introduced to Osiris, Isis, and Nephthys in the shrine. And so the point I want to make with this one is that the heart was believed to be made from the blood, one drop of the blood of the mother. And I think this is both the literal mother and the great mother. For the heart's wisdom it is the seat of the highest intelligence, and the heart's wisdom knows if this soul is worthy of the afterlife. And it is she who testifies either, yes, this son or daughter of mine is worthy of the afterlife, or no, they are not. And so the sacred order of Ma'at, the sacred laws set forth at the moment of creation, are overseen, are kept to, and it is the mother's love, the heart, the highest intelligence. And many ancient peoples consider not the brain, but the heart, our highest intelligence. The ancient Greeks called it nous, N-O-U-S, and discursive reasoning was a lower form. So that is the wisdom there. And now I want to share the dream that came to me as I was deep in the midst of this research in the beginning, and I was just reeling with all the confusion and the multiple symbols, and it seemed like everybody was doing everything that everybody else did as far as the gods and goddesses, and how do we ever make sense of this? And I had this beautiful dream. And Ma'at appeared to me as the primordial creatrix. This is the mother god. Her name is Mihat Weret, or the wild cow. She's the great flood, the original Nun. And she emerged from the cave to greet the dead. And she was wearing her crown, a vermilion sun disk nestled between her great, gracefully curving horns, and up from the sun disk rose two beautiful plumes, ostrich plumes, back to back, from the central solar womb that is hers. And a resonant message accompanied her appearance, until we realize that the gods and goddesses are multiple perspectives. They don't come alive. They are like the kaleidoscope, composed of all the same elements, but with changing patterns that express the differences endlessly, holoscopically. And thank you very much. That's it. So.
Oh,
wow.
So beautiful. You kept the best for last, your dream.
Yes, I did.
Wow.
I changed it around many times. It should be up front. It should be in the back.
Oh, wow. Oh, I'm so glad we recorded this, because we need to hear this a few times to be able to just unpeel. You know, there's so many layers. But Laurie, thank you so much for bringing it for bridging it to us, because we have all grown up with images of Egypt, and it's always been just, it meant nothing. It just was fascinating, but meant nothing. So I think you've given us an amazing bridge. Thank you.
You're
And
welcome.
I'm so keen to now hear Neela, because she's going to take this away into an esoteric Egypt and her experience. And then we'll come back and the two of you can exchange notes, which we can be flies on the wall and hear. So over to you, Neela.
Thank you so much. Laurie, that was just amazing. I learned so much. And it's just, and again, there is no real boundary between exoteric and esoteric when those of us who are trying to walk both paths. So I am, okay, so I'm gonna share the screen now. So here we are. So I'm calling it from chemetic to kenotic in search of Western gnosis. And I put it within quotation marks because the word West is a tricky word. And again, in 2020, we do not have those boundaries. But still, the way I'm seeing it is that it is possible that Egypt is the source of the Western esoteric paths, and gnosis is the word that is used for that. So that's the title. And let's see, it should move. Hold on, why is this not moving?
Try your touchpad on your screen. I couldn't get my buttons to work.
Huh, that's very strange. Okay, hold on, let me stop sharing. Why is it not moving? Oh, there it is. Okay, something has to be, fixed. Okay, so in the land of Kemet, it's very strange that in a kind of what I can say is a Jungian synchronicity that I ended up in Egypt in the beginning of my sabbatical. I'm on sabbatical right now, trying to understand this, this kind of Gnostic world, or the world that is probably least known to many of us. So the blog that I ended up writing called Desert Luminosity and an Emerald Nile, Wings of Isis Open on the Road to Nag Hammadi, since I'm looking at the Nag Hammadi text right now. And what I discovered, that I was literally on the edge of a vast knowledge system. And it's fascinating that it couldn't be eradicated. And my journey actually has brought more questions than answers. And Laurie, you have given me so many interesting things to think about. And again, since you mentioned how creation in Egypt is not a one-day thing, right? My first book, which is called In the Beginning is Desire, Tracing Kali's Footprints in Indian Literature, it is about in the beginning is. So this understanding that it is a continuous thing, which I discovered that all ancient wisdom traditions understood. So the question that I'm asking, again, I do not know much at all, Laurie, believe me. It's just on the edge of something so amazing. So the question I have is kenosis, gnosis. So is Kemet the root of the experience of emptying of the Godhead, emptying of the self? Is this the source of a natural gnosis that wakes us up from the dream of the world? And of course, this is the Black Mother's womb. Since you started to read the book, you will see that I have a section called Negrophobia later, the fear of blackness, fear of this, womb of the mother. And this is the mother continent, right? And it has all the open secrets. So I kind of talk about from fear of darkness to what I call endarkment. Rather than enlightenment, I use the word endarkment. And how so many of these wisdom traditions understood this thing that we call shadow. I mean, I'm so glad you mentioned the black and the white plumes of Ma'at, the double feather of Ma'at, because they knew the play of light and dark. And if we understand, if we can go through the shadow, then we reach the shade. In India, we have a word called chaya, which is the shade, which is actually a peaceful thing. It is not a scary thing. It's like when you are, if there is too much light of the sun, you know, you'd go under a tree and there is this beautiful shade. So how to move from shadow to shade, I think these are the methods that these traditions knew. And Gnosis, what I am discovering is the practical and a gynocentric method, like the Indic Tantra. So, and this of course is the Nile. We were fortunate to spend 5 days on a dahabeah, and look at this, you know, the hermetic thing, as above, so below, where you can see the life and death are entangled together in a dance. And the entire land seemed to epitomize that wisdom. So some of the things, of course, it was overwhelming. Some of the images that immediately captured, you know, my imagination. And then I began to read things so that I can understand. It was just, there was something that I could feel, but I didn't know what these things are. So a mother principle is the foundation in the mystic transmutation aspects. And this Egyptian book, with the people call Egyptian book of the dead, is actually Egyptian book of life. You know, it's not just about, you know, what will happen after you die. It's about every day. It's about living. So here Isis is nursing the young king. And I discovered from Muata Ashby's work, which thanks to my friend Chris Schwertman, who I'm glad to see is present, I discovered and I read, and that he says that this is the quintessential symbol of Kemetic initiation. So, and the king, the quote unquote king, he represents the aspiring human being on this road, royal road of awakening to the magic of Mati that you so beautifully presented. So, and you have already said, you know, about Isis. So Isis' asset is Theotokos, mother of God. So as you can see from these images, people know that, you know, the Virgin Mary and Christ's child is, you know, modeled on Isis and Horus. But here you can see the serpent power on the head. These are such familiar images, and yet there is something amazingly, you know, magical and mysterious about them. So Isis is the most famous name, you know, even though she is, you know, one aspect of many of these other things and so many other stories. So she began to represent the entire tradition. And the two aspects of Maat that you mentioned, Set is the Kemetic name. She's the light, wife of Osiris, mother of Horus, and Nephthys the dark, the wife of Set, mother of Anubis. So they balance the duality of Heru and Set in our being, as symbolized by the double crown of Upper and Lower Egypt. I learned all that from Muata Ashby, but I could see that how there is that, you know, same connection. So Maat is then the Tao. Maat is Rita that we know from the so-called Eastern tradition, represents the natural rhythm. Muata calls it Sema Tawi. Sema is also this harmonizing. We know from Sufi music called Sama, you know, it's a tuning. It's like a tuning system, so that you can hear the drumbeat of the heart and the drumbeat of the, you know, cosmic mother. We can see reality without its mask and wake up to the infinite potential. So Egypt is the land of that alchemical transmutation. And as you said, the whole thing is light as a feather. It's not because it's the gynocentric, it's the feminine. It is not something terribly hard. It's light as a feather, but yes, you have to shed the load, right? Everyone must pass through the gate, and you already said that. But the kingdom of heaven, then, it is not the outer thing, but it's also not after death, but it is here and now. So what I'm saying here, then the Western esoteric paths, which is led by Thoth, Hermes, this is the Greek name, Mercury is the Roman name, and Egypt is the portal. This is the land of alchemy, land of geometry, which we know, you know, the entire measuring of the earth came from the Nile inundation and that black mud that's regenerating. I'm so glad you mentioned the resurrection, which is a cyclical thing. So I was listening to a talk about the prophecy in one of the Hermetic texts. So since it is, what about Egypt? It seems that this need for regeneration that we are feeling right now in our bones. So there is a prophecy in one of the Hermetic texts So soil will be barren, air polluted by human beings, but a new cosmos will be birthed through the purification, So we know from the understanding of various practices of all the elements that have to be purified. And you mentioned that also, Laurie. So our elemental connection with them, our elemental connection with the earth. So I just saw a film called Kiss the Ground, which is an amazing film about how the earth can help us regenerate, and we need to regenerate the soil. So I see in Egypt that that kind of key, so to speak. So this Ausar mystery, the Osiris, these are ancient Kemetic names that Ashby uses, which you already mentioned, so I will not go through that. Dismemberment and regeneration, and Ankh is the key. That's the feminine womb, the first entity you can see there. So it opens the secret of life, that is the kingdom of heaven. And again, that comes from the Gospel of Thomas, which is within us and spread out in front of us. Jesus says that, but we do not see it. So this seeing is vital. So eyes of the mother, you will see this massively big eyes, right? And the eye of Horus. It is this ability to see, the real seeing, which you can call the third eye, but it's our ordinary eyes that are veiled. And when we see this polarity of Upper and Lower Egypt in our being, the Horus and Seth. And this understanding of the dance, I talk about, instead of the dueling duality, there has to be a dancing duality. You're so right why the Nepthet aspect was underplayed, downplayed, because of this, extreme obsession with the kind of androcentric light aspect, and downplaying what is dark because of the fear of the feminine and all that. So Horus and Seth are part of our being. And Ashby tells us that the double crown, which is when, again, it's almost like a yin yang, Shakti, Shiva, and Horus Hathor image, where the masculine, feminine, positive and negative come together in that crown. So there is the historical, geographical understanding, and then there is this inner understanding. That's all there is. Esoteric, after all, is not something mystifying, but it's the inner journey that this represents. So you see this symbol of regeneration. And what I really love about this animal-human synergy, right? And again, coming from India, we have so many, Ganesha, Hanuman, all these gods. So it was, in many ways very familiar, our evolutionary connection. Sphinx combines the power of the lioness body and the human head, our intellect. And when Ashby writes extensively about what he calls, actually uses the word Egyptian yoga and tantra, and coming forth by day, and understanding, and all of these zoomorphic forms kind of tell us that human beings are not separate, right? We're part of the entire cosmos. We have it in us. And Heru has to learn to dance with Hathor, the cow goddess of love, music, and magic. So you can't have just the solar, you have to have the lunar. So this is the wisdom that this entire tradition talks about. And the voyage of Ra, you already showed so beautifully with the last image, which depicts the boat, right? Traveling through one travels through Nut, the heavens, during the day, while shining upon Geb, the physical world. The other travels through the Duat, the nether world, at night, and provides the light of consciousness, which shines in the astral world. This is how Ashby describes the voyage of Ra. So then I discovered some other people who are actually regenerating, the tradition never died. It just, people didn't know about it. And it's fascinating, thanks to today's modern technology, that we can learn so much. So there is a center for the restoration of Maat. And where I was listening to one of the talks, and I see there is this Shabaka stone. And look at this image. It's like a mandala, right? Represents a mandala, from nothing to something. And for me, this again is the creative womb. I call Kali pregnant nothingness, and I can see the same images. And again, I do not know much about the emerald tablet, but it talks about impermanence. It's like the Buddhist understanding. It also talks about the secret of prima materia and transmutation. This is the alchemy, right? That thought Hermes takes us to. So the other thing that I discovered as I went through, the land and my search for the so-called Western gnosis is this: how the Coptic language itself actually has kept that ancient sound alive. I didn't know that. When people speak in Coptic, it's actually the ancient Egyptian language. And you can see that symbols intermingling. Here is this image, actually, this is the Coptic cross, Celtic cross, the balanced cross. You can also see that in Jung's Red Book. And this is actually the temple of Hathor, and there is this Coptic, you can also see the Coptic monastery there, very ancient, and the same symbol. And when we were there, the sun was shining, and I could see how this, ancient tradition, keeping it alive. So, so now that, so I'm seeing how this wonderful dance is happening. So after the publication of the Red Book, things change in psychotherapy. Those of you and you have done that work yourself. So I'm calling it the mystery of Osirian to the Red Book, right? So Liber Novus is the labyrinth of our being and the tree of life. So you can see the connection between entering the mystery of Osiris. This is Abydos, this incredible center. For me, in my blog, I write, it was like going to a Shakti Pita in India, dismembering and remembering, right? This fragmentation and then putting it together, this whole, aspect, and connecting with the tree of life. So I found when I was reading the Kemetic Tree of Life a little bit, it is so overwhelming. The entire, the whole book is like extraordinary. But I started to see, so this is where this whole thing, the Kemetic to the kenotic, right? So the Tree of Life is very similar. I find these images, in Kabbalah, right? And these connections are deep. It's almost like those foundational archetypes, those foundational images. They are given new shapes. They are given new design, but the foundational structure is the same, right? Because if this Hermetic tradition is correct, and the same thing in Vajrayana and is Shakta Shaiva Tantras in India, which is called Mahamudra, or Sufis call it Nur Mohar, which is simply a seal of the cosmic evolution in human beings. Each entity actually has that seal. You can see in the shapes in nature. You can see that all of it. So it is not it is not a big surprise if you have connection with these so-called Eastern traditions. And that's why the Western gnosis, as I said, it's like almost something familiar and yet strange in a beautifully new way. It's not like it's the same thing. It's a new articulation, and that's what makes it so much more fascinating and amazing to discover. And you can see how a particular civilization, and I liked, Neelima, when you had used the word civilizational elixir, right? That how each civilization creates a completely different world, creates a completely, new, fresh understanding. And the designs are different, the colors are different, the music's different, and still, so it's like this wonderful variation and a theme, and the renewal. The renewal is not the return of the past. It's just a completely new thing. And so here I am invoking a favorite thinker, even though I haven't read, but it's very, very poignant for me, is Hypatia, the thinker of the ancient world. And she was such a threat, right? So you can see the suppression of the feminine archetypally represented in the way she was murdered by this new religion. She was a Neoplatonist teacher. She was a mathematician, a wise counselor. And I found through the Wikipedia, at least it gives us a little bit of information. I haven't had a chance to go into, deeper into that aspect. That she who honorably presides over the mysteries of philosophy, right? So this is a different understanding of philosophy. It is, as you said, right, the Mati is Sophia, she is Shekinah. So philosophy is, after all, love of wisdom, philosophia. but we have forgotten that. Now it has become simply ratiocination. So this integral understanding where the lotus and the serpent are together. I love this, one of the images on the walls that I saw. Believe me, the images were so overwhelming, and trying to decipher these is like, I wish I could read the hieroglyphs. So I'm glad that you were able to give me some of, at least a little bit more. So I think this destruction symbolized in the horrendous murder of Hypatia probably represents the death of that feminine, but you can't really kill the mother principle. I write that because that's the very source, the substratum of our understanding. And then this all led to, it moved, Greeks, of course, were honest enough to acknowledge that they got so much from Egypt, right? Of course, they moved in a different way, but suddenly all these new resurrections are happening. I've discovered this person, Peter Kingsley's work, who says, well, practically all of the great philosophers, so-called rationalist philosophers, they were participants in the Eleusinian mysteries. And they were healing sanctuaries in Greece. There were these incubation rituals, going into the dark cave. And so it was part of the Greek understanding. So even if you look at the way the Greek world developed, so much is connected with the Egyptian understanding, Egyptian knowledge, because after all, they traveled and they learned from each other. So, so this is the understanding for me now that Egypt, and I'm just showing you some images here that were very, very powerful for me while I was traveling. So this is the small shrine on Mount Sinai. Apparently, this is this tiny place where Moses meditated. And again, it's that cave. It's like a tiny, small cave. And he's known as Musa in Sufism. And we saw this dog. It's like the kind of on Mount Sinai. We saw a cat and dog. And there was suddenly like mystical Judaism, Christian Gnosis, and Sufi Silsila. They all got connected for me in Kemet on top of the Mount Sinai. So it seems that the connection with this ancient tradition is vital. The problem is that when we think that is some ancient primitive mythology, it's kind of, people didn't know, but they knew so much more than we can imagine. And the Nag Hammadi texts have actually changed our perception of early Christianity and the Gnostic Gospels. And again, this play of Abraxas is the god of light and dark, which you can see the Egyptian mythology. By the way, mythology is simply a way to talk about the inner life, which is both untrue and always true. Because what happens with this, that we think, oh, so when people literalize their myths, that, okay, there was really a Garden of Eden and really Adam and Eve, by literalizing, we actually lose the power of the myth, because the myth actually gives us this energizing power. And I'm very, very fortunate to actually be learning from the live tradition, the Gnostic Sanctuary, and my Gnostic teacher right now, her name is Tau Rosamond Ikshwaku Miller. I have also written a little bit about my connection with her in one of my Gnostic blogs. So this brings me to my final image here, and I'm invoking Mary Magdalene because this is the balancing, right? We have completely forgotten the other half of the Gnostic tradition. And when she's holding, all of you probably know the story of the egg. So the egg then, it's the world egg. It's Hiranyagarbha, the Sanskrit word. Tathagata Garbha is the Buddhist word, which is the seed of new life. And this is the rite of spring. So the egg becomes that emblem of resurrection. And whatever I have discovered so far, there is a good possibility that Mary Magdalene was a priestess of Isis and Aphrodite, and so much has already been written, and I'm just beginning to see the work that has been done by many, many scholars and seekers. And so she has a knowledge. She knows when she's anointing. Anointing is a spiritual knowledge. This is an embodied thing, not some abstract head aspect. So I would end here saying that Egypt could have been that central place from where this kenotic knowledge through the feminine spread. and of course suppressed for historical reasons, and for whatever reason it is now resurrecting, hopefully to help us renew ourselves in this time. And in many ways, the paradox always happens. We are homebound. The virus has made us aware that we have to go inside, we have to discover the source of our being. And here we are connecting with the entire world through this machine. So I thank Neelima for inviting me for this and learned a lot from Laurie. And let's now have some dialogue here. Thank you very much.
Ah, super, Neela. That was just took us along on such a flow. And what a sweep. You covered Sufism and Judaism and Christianity, and you brought it to its root as Egypt. It's just kind of mind-blowing. And for you to bring it to Mary Magdalene at the end is so precious and poignant at this time. So I guess I'm opening this up to both Laurie and you. My question had been, what is it about Egypt? And you both have found Maat as the kind of common thing in both your presentations. So I find that interesting. You know, when we went to Egypt, we didn't so much focus on Maat. There was much more Sekhmet and Isis, and we didn't really, she wasn't so alive in our awareness then. And I'm wondering, is she showing up now at this time? And maybe I'm going to make this more real than we would like. I started this morning thinking it's going to be such a beautiful day, my favorite subject, Egypt. We're going to have a lovely time. I picked up my essence for the day, and it was Mer, as in the mother of Pondicherry. And then I had a call from a dear friend. I don't know if she's on the call, but we then discovered this very, very incredibly tragic gang rape and murder that has taken place in India a couple of days ago. And 4 high caste men gang raped and mutilated this Dalit girl as she was going to farm. And they broke her back, and they cut her tongue, and they gouged her eyes. And I don't know if my friend is on the call, but we were just holding space for each other and processing this archetypal event. And it felt as if it was a bookend to what happened on the 16th of December 2012 with Nirbhaya, the young girl who was raped on the bus and then mutilated and who died. That was about 8 years ago. And so we're in a way in a new octave starting. And we're back to the misogyny, right? We are back to the denial of the feminine. And my friend was sharing with me how the spine represents the rising of the Shakti, the Kundalini, the goddess, and the eyes of the goddess that see everything. So the cutting of the tongue, which is Kali. And so, you know, there were all these very, very dark mythic symbols of the need to destroy the feminine, the mother principle. And so I asked both of you, what is it at this time? And that Egypt can perhaps help the collective consciousness of not just the West, but also the East. Because Egypt is also between both, right? What is it that Egypt can raise up at this time? And is it the return of the mother? And could this horrible, horrible event be some kind of a initiation to trigger and awaken the in the collective consciousness, the lost mother principle. Neela, would you like to? Or, yeah, Laurie, would you like either of you?
Yes, I would love to. Because what it made me think of is when I was researching Mott, after I had that dream, I realized that what I needed to do, I had been following the convention that the scholars had set up based on grammatical rules, and when Ma'at is used as a concept, they said this is an abstract concept, and we make a lowercase name and we italicize it and we use a genderless pronoun. And when it refers to the goddess, it will capitalize it and use a gendered pronoun. And so much more often you would find Ma'at used in this way. And after that dream, I realized that that had depotentated her. And that's why she hasn't occurred in the mythologies in such a strong way. The reason why we have Isis and Nephthys even is because the Greeks took her and made her into something that they could identify with, and thus she came forward into our time. But Ma'at was kind of left very quiet, and I'd studied Egyptian mythology for many years before I discovered Ma'at. And when I had that dream, I went back through my manuscript, painstakingly changing each and every instance of the lowercase and the genderless pronoun. And I was like, there's no way that they made this an abstract concept. So that popped to mind as we try to destroy the feminine. I think these horrific acts are a result of that, of the terror that she is rising. And she has been for over 100 years, and she will not be denied. Her time is now. And these are the pushbacks on that moment. And you're right to see the archetypal significance of the mutilations and the injuries and the murdering as a representation of the attack on the feminine and the places where she is. But the sense I have is that she's so powerful and she's so present, and there are so many men and women, scholars, artists, people bringing her Ma'at's religion alive, bringing Egyptian things alive, and many, many other cultural offerings from India, Kali and Durga, and all the ways that the feminine is coming. And thank God she exists in these other places, because as Neela so beautifully points out, our own consciousness, our own imagination has really been dampened down, and those have been eliminated. And then, so the other thing I think is, that we, as we embrace these, we have to find the ways, the resonance with what really lives and is alive for us. Not, to not get caught in too much intellectual. I think some of the practices of the devotional work are so important, and that really came alive for me when I saw that the reciprocity, how you connect these three realms that Egypt so beautifully saw as essential to life: the divine, the human, and the ancestral. And we have to find the way to reconnect those and use those to enliven. I see Peter Martin has joined our call, and he had his mother passed a couple of years ago, and she was so present with him as her passing came, and he came and visited in Santa Fe, and I was so touched by her influence and holding in his life. And she had lived this long, beautiful life. And so we have to turn to the places where the mother, where the feminine. And the last thing I thought of as you were speaking was, in the Neolithic time, the feminine was the daughter and the mother, or the daughter, mother, and crone. And so she carried those dualisms and polyisms on with her as she came into ancient Egypt. And and many of the goddesses, including Ma'at, are seen as the divine daughter, as are the sons are also that. So if we can start marrying these multiple energies that have the masculine and the feminine in multiple dynamics, like the youth of the power, and then the age of the bringing the wisdom. And so anyways, that's what came to me as you were speaking.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Laurie. Neela, do you have any thoughts, or should we take questions?
Yes, it is absolutely horrifying what you described. And it's so strange, absolutely. I began writing my blog, and it was called No Country for Women, because of that rape and unbelievable, and it happens all the time, by the way. It's not that, we are, so desensitized by this destruction of the embodied. See, the thing is, the dualism, where we have given so much emphasis, and I love how Laurie presented, right? This intellectual erasure of the feminine, right? By making it gender neutral. The same thing happened in Jewish Kabbalah Shekinah when I started to realize, oh no, it's not feminine, it's simply a grammar, but it's not, and the entire, and see, the irony, of course, is that this is happening to the so-called land of the mother, which is India. They're Durga Kali, but they had cats appropriated by horrendous patriarchy. And by this, I do not simply mean the rule of the father, by the way, whatever literally it means. It is this, everything that we call matter, right? It is just trash. And the female body has been, turned into matter, as opposed to the spirit or intellect, mind over matter. Cartesian dualism is also that, right? So everything, the earth feminized, we can extract whatever you want to. And that has brought us to the brink of this disaster, self-destruction, and the abysmal confusion about what is really life, what is really worth living. And I cannot, since you talked about what happened, that horrendous thing in India, another rape and mutilation. And yes, Neelima, you are right, cutting of the tongue, because women are speaking. They are talking, they are speaking their truth. And it is very scary, because the entire structure that has been created, right, it is to suppress that aspect. Now, there are philosophical meaning, there are mythological meaning, and then deep, deep esoteric aspects to that. And we need to uncover all of that. And for some reason, an English teacher, why am I doing this? It's funny how I have ended up in this space, right? So that we could speak that other truth, which is not a separate truth, by the way. It is a balanced understanding of the masculine and the feminine. And this is what is about the, what I call the mother principle, the womb of creation, from which both the male and the female arise, right? The black and white feather of Mati, she represents that. But see, in our zeal to create, say, Advaita, right, in Indians, which is caste and gender-based, by the way, the impact of this Mayavadi stuff in Hinduism has destroyed India, believe me. Because it is a different kind of understanding. It's an abstraction of, something flattening everything, right? Same thing happens with the notion of monotheism, a patriarchal as well as an imperial colonizing monotheism, in the name of that one entity. So these ancient traditions understood, what is this one? We experience diversity, which is the gift of the Great Mother. And we see that in Egypt, we see this in India, we see this in China, and it is there all over Europe, by the way. That's what led to my book, Absent Mother, God of the West. And through the Dark Mother, the Black Madonna that we discover. But unfortunately, we cannot simply, we have to make sure that our laws, our historical understanding, our political understanding, they're all working together, right? So why is this then in India, this unbelievably abysmal macho thing has arisen? And everybody, and it gives people to play out these things, right? Now, I cannot help but think about what happened in the US yesterday, right? During the debate, these three guys, blah, 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 blah. It's like they represented the confusion, total confusion. Nobody can hear anything because these three old men, they were just constantly at each other. I said, wow, it's like on the world scene, this entire confused ideology is playing out, totally confused, not connected with anything that is living, anything that gives meaning, anything that creates this absolutely kingdom of heaven is in front of us, right? How do we not see this when he's saying that? So anyway, I get too worked up over that. And when I wrote that first blog, the last one is about Egypt, but the first one came from this thing called No Country for Women. And then I wrote about Tantric India, a completely different India, which remains underground. Its people have appropriated even that most liberatory tradition with methods. So when I said that Gnosis is this method in the Western, it's a method. It's not an ideology. It's not just a theoretical. A lot of scholars will write lots of books, but in the end, we need to recognize that there is a method of balancing, recognizing that the violence is also within us, not just outside. We can condemn the violence outside, but what about the violence inside us? The disturbed psyche, and so many people. And I was very happy to see an Egyptian woman who was a psychotherapist in London, who has returned to Egypt, and she has started, because these stories, these myths are about us. These are about our psyches, about psychology, and cleansing, right? Cleansing the elements in us so that we can wake up to the, Horus, Heru, Christ consciousness, you can call it, Tathagata Garbha, the Buddha being in us, the possibility of the human, and all the traditions. In my journey, I have been like so fortunate to discover that it is there everywhere. All the world's shamans knew it. I have written about the mother continent, about when the Black Panther came out. I wrote about the shamanic world of the African world. But think about it. The Black Lives Matter is also part of the same thing, right? The fear of blackness. That's the fear of death. That's kenosis. Emptying of the self. Emptying. It's not the, I am Brahman, this wonderful understanding of light, but it is that complete dissolution experience, which the deep traditions are articulating in so many ways everywhere. So I'm very, very grateful, and of course, terribly sad that this keeps happening, but at least we can talk about it. I also wrote at that time that the women have to know. Women have to know that nothing can desacralize their bodies, by the way. No amount of rape or assault on the female body will ever desacralize it. We have to recognize that foundational sacred nature of the body, right? Then we will also honor the sacred body of the male. But what is sacred? It is not something against profane. It is not something, it is simply life. And it's fantastic play, right? That this whole world is. Anyway, I'll stop and hopefully people can respond.
Just listening to both of you is like poetry, and it touches the soul. And I know there are some wonderful people in the audience today who must have questions. So I don't want to be the one who's taking up this space. If there's anyone who would like to ask any of us questions, please go ahead and unmute yourselves.
Got a question.
Go ahead.
Yeah, so this is kind of, I would love just kind of both of your answers here. Something that I've kind of come to understand just through the education that I've gotten on Egypt is that, we view it as a static thing. How it's typically taught is viewed as a very static thing, but in fact that's not the case. Is that there's huge transformations and movements, and it was very dynamic. And so I'm just wondering about, like, how, what is the modern lens that maybe we put on this, and like the deep, like what basically what inside of us that is part of this modern time is really speaking to Egypt, because like Egypt has called on us for forever. I mean, Neelima, you kind of made that point in your introduction that Egypt fascinates us. So like, what to the both of you, like, what do you think it is within the modern human that is so fascinated and so called to Egypt? Like, what is the lesson that like our internal selves are begging to learn from Egypt that needs to be called forward?
Well, and hello, Sean. And thank you for that question. I really feel like in part it is the Egyptians themselves. And I loved learning about Yishe Chogyal, who went throughout the land of Tibet and planted the Terma text. And these are the texts that are in a natural landscape. And when the time and the people are right to activate those wisdoms that are held within the landscape, the right person will show up and the text will activate and they will have a download. And I kind of feel like that's what's happening. And I feel like Egypt is the Egyptians, the sense I got because of how alive the energy is in the temples and the tombs and in their artifacts. And I feel like it's very resonant. Even the Egyptologists who had negative opinions about the culture or the civilization spent their lives studying it. So that even overcame that the dismissal of certain aspects because it called. And I think it's in the psyche. I think it's the very deepest layers of the psyche. I think the archetypal layer is not unique to any one culture. It is just clothed in the images of the culture. And that archetypal layer has really gone to sleep. It's been allowed to get stagnant and old and ostracized. And it's longing and it's pushing us to re-engage with it and we've dismissed the imagination. It's one of those things on the negative column, along with compassion and empathy and so forth. And the imagination is calling to us, and it is the images that are embedded there. And like the Terma text, they have so much energy in them, and they're calling to us. And so that's one answer to your question, and I'm sure Neela will have something else to add. Thank you.
It's amazing that you are invoking Yeshe Tsogyal, the female Buddha of Tibet, by the way. I don't know if you know, you should read the book called The Sky Dancer. She was also gang raped, by the way. And she is the female Buddha of the time. Yes, the Terma text. Yes, Egypt is that submerged consciousness. The other thing, think about it. It's in Africa, right? Think about in the colonizing imperative. The whole world was feminized. The whole world was, this whole misadventure of colonialism. And Africa, the dark continent, the, impoverished, the whole Black. So it's impossible to, for a very long time, scholarship tried to deny that Egypt is actually African. The Black pharaohs, the Kushite, these were all, but these things have all come up, right? That they were not something, an aberration. They're part of that entire civilization. The other thing about Egypt, beside the architecture, it is impossible to think that this is some sort of a primitive culture, right? Something that happened, we are so advanced, my goodness. Any trip there will tell you that the human intellect, creativity, and this amazing capacity for design and to construct things that are mind-boggling. So it's very, very hard to ignore Egypt, right? Of course, for all kinds of reasons, the Mohenjo-daro, Harappa ancient civilization was, since we didn't find a Rosetta Stone to understand the Harappa, this thing, but now people are realizing that. So I would say that the pull to Egypt is for all kinds of reasons. because we need to return to the mother continent in many ways, that regenerative dark womb. And it represents, the Nile represents that, that regeneration. So anyway, we're gonna run out of time very soon if anybody else has a question, but thank you for that question.
Thank you both for great answers.
Thank you.
Any more questions? I have one, a couple of thoughts actually. Let's see if we have time. One other thing that perhaps draws us to Egypt is this is one civilization that seems to have deeply focused on the idea of death and on the experience of death. And so humanity's quest for immortality has been with us since obviously time immemorial. So maybe that's another thing that is still inside us, that quest for immortality, the possibility of immortality is an aspiration and a seed we still carry in us. And I'm a practitioner of the integral yoga of Sri Aurobindo and the mother, and this whole thing of man is a transitional being, and this body and its inability to go the distance that the soul needs to go when it incarnates, and that this material body itself is going to evolve to a place where it is sufficiently plastic to last as long as the soul needs the body to last. So effectively immortality. And I think maybe that's another reason we go back to Egypt again and again. We know that perhaps the greatest attempt towards immortality happened during that civilization. And maybe there is the occult side of Egypt that not much is really known about. Maybe we still have mystery schools, but they were very strong occultists. They were tantrics, they knew how to manipulate the elements and forces, and not necessarily all of which were divine. So with great power comes great responsibility, and power corrupts, and that corruption of that power could have also led to the decline of Egypt, which is something the mother has talked about. And so I also wonder if Egypt is also some kind of a reminder to us that even the greatest of civilizations can fall. So these are the two things I'm thinking, Egypt reminds us of immortality, and Egypt reminds us of our vulnerability to power.
Right, absolutely. You got that completely right. And one question that was on the chat about confusion and math, because we have suppressed that wisdom, and you're absolutely right, the occult is a very deadly thing. The same thing happened to India. The decline of India was the misappropriation of the tantric tradition. They forgot the connection of Buddha and started to play with this, stupid little power games. But you were right, the danger of power in the occult. This is why the math is so important, because it's wisdom. It's not just Shakti, it is Pragya in the Indian language. Manipulating Shakti is deadly, both for individuals and for the collective. And the confusion arises. When I said that yesterday's debate represented that confusion, it's like the Tower of Babel, right? Nobody is hearing anything. Nobody can hear because there is no quiet inside, right? The internal system is so messed up that we cannot hear each other. So until and unless we invite that wisdom, which comes from the womb, it comes from the feminine, right? Where there is this play, where is this profound quiescence and the dance. It's a dynamic thing. It's not a static quiet, it's a dynamic quiet. So there is so much to do, so much to learn from each other, from every civilization. And yes, Egypt is a marker of human excellence in every possible way.
Thank you, Neela. We are on time. We are 1 minute past. So I'm going to ask for just a closing statement from Laurie. And which books would you recommend to explore Egypt in current times?
I have right on. So the Peter Kingsley work is very good. Jeremy Nyler is wonderful as well. And then one of my favorites, she's an Egyptologist from Oxford, and her name is Alison Roberts, and she has written on the origin of alchemy in Egypt. And for an Egyptologist to even go there is pretty phenomenal. And her translations, her first book was on Hathor, and then she has one that she calls where she starts introducing the connection to the alchemy is my mother, my heart. And she explains the Hathor and Mott thing. So I would really recommend Alison. Plus, she's a gorgeous writer. She really turns the phrases beautifully. So that's my suggestion. And as far as a closing statement, I just, I feel so much gratitude for having found my way, being drug through the process of writing a dissertation into ancient Egypt and into the depths of it, and found my way to Mott. It's really been deeply moving, and to have access as a woman who, was as a child deeply committed to Jesus's compassion and love, and then suddenly at 10 started not being able to resonate with that tradition and losing the spiritual connection until the divine feminine came back into my life when I was pregnant with my daughter, my first child, and really then started growing in scholarship. And so I feel so grateful not to have just been left in the wasteland. And I'm so thankful for people like both of you who are helping educate us and understand and explore the mother in particular. Thank you.
Thank you both, Neela and Laurie. I just love that you called her name, and I feel we have nothing more to say.
Right.
The mother.
The mother.
And may the mother take over this whole space and this whole time. May it be her time. And may we collaborate and surrender to that greater grace and not have to suffer through it, through the change that's upon us. So
Yes.
thank you so much. Thank you.
Thank you, everybody. Thank you. Take care.
Bye-bye.